She had always been someone who noticed things others ignored. A small crack in the wall, the way sunlight danced on the floor, or how a bird would pause before taking flight. She liked to draw these moments, sketching in a notebook that she carried everywhere. But until now, her drawings had never left the pages of that notebook. They were hers, quiet, private, and safe. Yet there was a strange restlessness growing inside her, a whisper that maybe these sketches could be more than just lines on paper. Her friends at work often saw her doodling during breaks, sometimes laughing and sometimes shaking their heads. "What is that supposed to be?" they would ask, pointing at a strange figure or a weird pattern she had created, and she would smile, not really knowing how to explain it. It wasn't supposed to be anything, at least not yet, but she felt a pulse of excitement every time she imagined it becoming something bigger, something people could actually see and feel. She just had to try. The idea came one evening while she was walking home. She noticed a group of children playing with makeshift toys, pieces of old cardboard and string, creating something magical from almost nothing. It made her think about her own sketches. What if she could take these simple drawings and turn them into something tangible, something that could surprise people, make them feel joy or curiosity? The thought thrilled her, even if it seemed a little impossible. The next day at work, she started talking about her idea casually, thinking maybe someone would encourage her. Instead, she was met with laughter. "That sounds like a joke," one colleague said, smirking. Another added, "You really think anyone would care about that?" Even her family laughed when she mentioned it at dinner. "Why waste your time on something like that?" they asked, shaking their heads. It was discouraging, but also strangely motivating. The more they laughed, the more she wanted to prove them wrong. She started small, gathering materials she could afford. Pieces of cardboard, bits of old cloth, glue, scissors, and paints. Her apartment slowly filled with her experiments, half-finished pieces scattered across the floor, tables covered in scraps. It was chaotic, but in that chaos she felt alive. Every night she would work for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes forgetting the world outside her little space. Her hands would be covered in paint, her hair tangled, but she didn't care. She was creating something that mattered to her. The first few attempts were clumsy. Shapes didn't fit. Colors didn't match. And sometimes the whole piece would collapse before she could even finish it. She would stare at the mess, frustrated, thinking maybe everyone was right. Maybe it was a joke. But then she would take a deep breath, pick up a new piece of cardboard, and start again. Each failure was a lesson, teaching her something about balance, about color, about patience. Slowly, she began to see progress, little sparks of promise that kept her going. There were moments when the isolation felt heavy. Friends invited her out, family asked her to join gatherings, and she had to decline, wanting to protect the fragile ideas she was nurturing. She felt lonely sometimes, but she reminded herself that this was a temporary sacrifice. The world outside could wait. Her creation, her dream, could not. One evening, she decided to take a risk. She combined several of her sketches and experiments into a single piece, something bigger than anything she had attempted before. It was still rough, still imperfect, but it carried a spark, a hint of what it could become. She placed it on a small table in her living room, stepping back to look at it. Her heart pounded. It didn't matter if anyone else liked it yet. For the first time, she could see the potential clearly, and it filled her with a strange kind of hope. The next day, she brought it to work, trying to gauge the reaction of her colleagues. They stared at it, some trying to hide their confusion, others openly laughing. "Is this supposed to be funny?" someone asked. She felt a sting of embarrassment, but also a quiet pride. She didn't explain it. She didn't have to. The piece was hers, and it had a life of its own. She returned home that evening, more determined than ever. Night after night, she refined her ideas, learning from mistakes and exploring new techniques. Sometimes she watched tutorials online. Sometimes she tried things by trial and error. Each small success felt monumental. The folds in her cardboard started to hold shapes she wanted. The paints blended in ways that surprised her, and even the glue seemed to cooperate when she was patient enough. Slowly, the idea that had seemed silly and impossible began to take form. She began to notice changes in herself, too. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and even her laughter had a new lightness to it. The ridicule of others no longer weighed her down as much. She had found a source of joy that was independent of anyone else's approval. And though she didn't tell anyone yet, she had started to imagine what it would be like to share her work with the world, to see eyes light up, to hear laughter that wasn't mocking but admiring. Sometimes, she would sit by the window late at night, looking at the city lights, wondering if anyone would ever understand what she was doing. She didn't need anyone to understand right now. She just needed to keep going. And with each passing day, the quiet voice inside her grew stronger. You can do this. You can make something real, something beautiful, something that no one will laugh at once they see it finished. Then came the night when she felt a breakthrough. Though she didn't know it at the time, a sketch she had been struggling with suddenly clicked. She combined techniques she had learned, shapes she had tried over and over, and somehow they came together. She looked at the result and could hardly believe it. It was still a draft, still rough, but it carried energy, emotion, and something unmistakable: life. For the first time, she truly felt that her joke might not be a joke at all. Her excitement couldn't be contained. She moved around the apartment, gathering her materials to work late into the night. Hours passed like minutes. She painted, folded, glued, cut, and shaped, losing herself completely. Outside, the city slept. Inside, a quiet revolution was happening on her little table. Finally, she stepped back, exhausted but exhilarated. She looked at her creation, a piece that combined her sketches, experiments, and endless hours of trial and error. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. She touched it gently as if afraid to break it and whispered to herself, maybe this can be more than a joke. Maybe it can be something real. For the first time, she imagined it being displayed, being seen, being admired. The idea seemed distant, almost like a dream, but it felt possible now. In the days that followed, she continued to refine her work, each adjustment bringing it closer to what she envisioned. She still faced doubts and setbacks, but the laughter of others no longer mattered as much. She had tasted what it felt like to create something with her own hands, something that carried her vision, and that taste was addictive. Every morning she woke up with new ideas, new ways to improve her creation. She experimented with colors, textures, and shapes. She watched as pieces that had once seemed impossible to fit together now came together effortlessly. The chaos of her apartment slowly transformed into a space of focused creativity. And through it all, a quiet confidence grew inside her, a belief that what she was doing could touch people, even if she couldn't see it yet. She didn't know how long it would take or if anyone would ever understand her work. But for now, she was happy to be creating, to be exploring, to be chasing a dream that had once seemed impossible. And deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning. The idea that everyone had laughed at, called a joke, was slowly, quietly beginning to show its true potential. One day, she thought, maybe they would see it too. Maybe one day they would stop laughing. Maybe one day they would understand that what had seemed like a joke was actually the start of something extraordinary. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Her small apartment became a world of its own, filled with the pieces she had created and the sketches she still carried in her notebook. Every corner told a story, some of success, others of failure, but all of them marked the journey she was taking. The excitement she felt at the beginning had deepened into a steady, determined drive. She no longer cared whether people laughed at her idea. What mattered was bringing her vision to life. Working late into the night became her routine. The quiet hum of the city outside her window became a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. She experimented with different materials, tried new techniques, and even learned things she had never imagined she would know. There were nights when nothing worked, when glue refused to stick or paints blended in ways that ruined the effect she wanted. She would stare at the mess, breathe deeply, and start again. Each failure taught her something, slowly shaping her skills and patience. Her friends noticed the change. She smiled more often, walked with a sense of purpose, and sometimes spoke about her work with a sparkle in her eyes. They still didn't understand what she was doing, and some of them still teased her lightly. But the laughter no longer hurt. She had learned to protect her inner world, to keep her dream safe until it was ready to be shared. And deep down, she felt that one day they would see it differently. She began to document everything she was doing. Each sketch, each failed attempt, each small victory went into a notebook or a photo album. She liked to look back at them and see how far she had come. There was something magical about seeing progress in black and white, about knowing that months of hard work were slowly forming into something tangible. She sometimes wondered if others would ever understand the hours she had spent alone with her ideas, the quiet determination that had pushed her through so many nights of doubt. One day, she encountered a problem that seemed impossible. A particular piece refused to take shape no matter how many times she tried. She had an idea in her mind, a clear vision, but her hands could not bring it to life. She grew frustrated, angry even, and for the first time she considered giving up. She left the apartment and wandered through the city, hoping that a walk would clear her mind. As she passed people on the streets, she noticed small details: a reflection on a puddle, the texture of a brick wall, the curve of a tree branch, and suddenly inspiration struck. She rushed home, her energy renewed, and began working again, approaching the problem from a new angle. By morning, the piece had transformed into something far better than she had imagined. Her perseverance began to pay off. Pieces that had once seemed impossible now fit together beautifully. Colors she had struggled to blend suddenly came alive, and textures that had frustrated her became her strongest tools. She started to see her work in a new light, not just as individual pieces but as part of a larger vision. The collection she was creating was beginning to have a rhythm, a heartbeat. She could almost see it taking shape in its final form, and the thought made her heart race. Despite the progress, loneliness still lingered. She missed casual conversations, laughter with friends, and the simple comfort of shared meals. But each night, as she looked at her creations, she reminded herself that this solitude was temporary. The world could wait. Her dream could not. The quiet nights spent working, learning, and experimenting were building something far greater than fleeting social moments. She clung to that thought, letting it fuel her work. One afternoon, she received unexpected encouragement. A neighbor had seen one of her smaller pieces through the window and knocked on her door to compliment her work. It was a simple gesture, but it filled her with hope. For the first time, she realized that someone outside her circle could appreciate what she was doing. This small validation ignited a fire within her. She decided to take more risks, to push her work further, and to believe in the possibility that others might one day see her creations as she did. She also started to research. She read about artists and inventors who had struggled for years before finding success. Their stories resonated deeply with her. She learned that persistence, patience, and an unshakable belief in one's vision were often more important than talent alone. This knowledge gave her courage. She realized that the ridicule she had faced earlier was a natural part of creating something new, something that challenged the ordinary. The laughter of others was no longer a wall. It was simply noise that she had to rise above. With renewed determination, she began to experiment with larger pieces. These new creations required more space, more materials, and more planning. She cleared a corner of her apartment and worked tirelessly, building, shaping, and perfecting. The challenge excited her. Each step forward, each successful experiment was a small victory. She began to see the transformation not only in her work but in herself. She was becoming more confident, more patient, and more attuned to her own creativity. There were still moments of doubt. Sometimes she would stare at a piece and wonder if it was good enough, if it would ever be understood, if she was chasing an impossible dream. But she refused to stop. She reminded herself of the first spark, the joy she had felt when the idea had first come to her. That joy, pure and unfiltered, was worth every struggle, every lonely night, every mistake. It was her compass guiding her through the uncertainty. As the months passed, she began to notice subtle changes in how she approached her work. Mistakes became opportunities to learn. Failures became stepping stones, and small successes became milestones. She began to trust herself more, to rely on her instincts, and to listen to the quiet voice inside that had encouraged her from the very beginning. That voice had never led her astray. It had been patient, guiding her step by step, allowing her to grow in ways she hadn't imagined. One evening, she decided to invite a close friend to see her work. She wasn't sure how it would be received, but she needed feedback, even if it was critical. The friend entered her apartment, looked around, and for a moment said nothing. Then came a slow smile. "I didn't know you could do this," the friend said, genuinely impressed. "It's amazing." It was the first time someone had seen her work without laughing or dismissing it. The words filled her with a mix of relief and excitement. She realized that her dream, once mocked, was beginning to be recognized as something special. This small validation fueled her further. She worked with renewed vigor, refining her pieces, experimenting with new ideas, and pushing her creativity beyond what she had thought possible. Each night was an adventure, a journey into the unknown where failure was just a step toward success. She began to see patterns, connections, and possibilities that had been invisible before. Her work was evolving, growing into something bigger, something that could one day capture the attention of the world. She also began to think about sharing her work more widely. The idea was daunting, even frightening. The fear of ridicule, of being misunderstood, of failing publicly was real. But she remembered the long nights, the countless mistakes, and the spark of joy that had started it all. She realized that if she could survive the quiet struggle, she could face the world. Her work was ready, even if she wasn't entirely sure the world was ready for it. As the days went on, she continued to push herself, experimenting with scale, technique, and concept. Her apartment was filled with the energy of creation, a tangible testament to her perseverance. She no longer counted the hours spent working. Time became irrelevant. Only the process mattered. And in that process, she found fulfillment, purpose, and a deep connection to something larger than herself. By the end of this period, she had grown not only as a creator, but as a person. Her confidence had blossomed, her patience had deepened, and her belief in herself had solidified. She understood that the laughter of others had never defined her. It was her own vision, her own dedication that mattered. And with that understanding, she was ready for the next stage. The stage where her work would move beyond the confines of her apartment and into the wider world. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to have her work seen, appreciated, and celebrated. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew challenges lay ahead, but she also knew she had the resilience to face them. The joke that everyone had laughed at was no longer a joke in her mind. It was becoming something powerful, something alive, something that carried her heart and soul into the world. And with that thought, she smiled, ready to take the next step, ready to turn persistence into breakthrough, ready to transform her vision into a masterpiece. By now, she had reached a stage where her work was no longer just sketches and small experiments. It had grown into something more substantial, something that hinted at the brilliance she had imagined months ago. The small victories she had experienced, the first compliments, the moments when shapes finally fit and the colors finally came alive, had built a foundation of confidence. She was ready for something bigger, something that would show not only her talent, but also the countless hours of dedication she had poured into her creations. She decided to attempt a piece that was more ambitious than anything she had done before. It would combine elements of all her previous work, sketches, textures, colors, and structures. The challenge was enormous. She had to think about proportion, balance, and detail in ways she had never done. At first, it was overwhelming. She stared at the materials scattered around her apartment, unsure of where to start. But she took a deep breath and reminded herself of the journey so far. Every failure, every mistake had taught her something. She would rely on those lessons now. The next few days were a blur of focus and energy. She worked tirelessly, shaping pieces, gluing, painting, and adjusting. Her apartment was filled with scraps, some failed experiments, and pieces of her growing masterpiece. The chaos no longer frustrated her. It energized her. She could see the potential in every fragment, every color, every line. She began to understand that creating something extraordinary was not a straight path. It was a journey full of twists, turns, and unexpected moments. During this period, she also started to see her work differently. Instead of thinking of individual pieces, she began to view them as part of a larger whole. She imagined the way colors would interact, the way shapes would guide the viewer's eye, and the way textures would invite touch. This new perspective allowed her to see connections she had never noticed before. It was as if the pieces were communicating with each other, guiding her to something greater than she had ever envisioned. There were moments of doubt, of course. Some nights she would look at a section of her work and feel as if it was all wrong. Nothing seemed to fit. The colors clashed. The shapes refused to align, and the vision she had imagined seemed distant. In those moments, she felt frustration and exhaustion, but she refused to let it stop her. She reminded herself that creation was rarely smooth, that every great work required persistence and patience. She would step back, breathe, and try again, often discovering that the solution was simply a matter of seeing things from a different angle. One evening, while working late, she received an unexpected call. It was a friend who had noticed her dedication and curiosity. The friend asked to see what she had been working on, genuinely interested. She hesitated but agreed, feeling both nervous and excited. When the friend arrived, she looked around the apartment, taking in the chaos and the pieces. Then she focused on the central piece, the one that had been consuming most of the artist's energy. The friend's eyes widened, and for a long moment there was silence. Finally, she said, "I didn't know you could create something like this. It's incredible." The words filled her with a mixture of relief, pride, and renewed energy. For the first time, she felt that someone outside her immediate imagination could truly appreciate her work. Encouraged by this, she pushed herself even further. She experimented with lighting, arranging pieces to see how shadows and highlights would change their appearance. She considered movement, imagining how a viewer's eye would travel across the composition. She tested different combinations, sometimes scrapping hours of work to try something new. Each change brought new insight, and each success brought an indescribable joy. She was no longer creating just for herself. She was creating for the possibility that others might experience the same wonder she did. As her work grew, so did her confidence. She began to speak about it more openly, sharing her thoughts and ideas without fear of ridicule. People around her began to take notice, some with curiosity, others with admiration. Even those who had laughed at her earlier began to pause, their skepticism giving way to intrigue. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. She realized that the journey had not just changed her work, it had changed her presence in the world. She had grown more assured, more articulate, and more willing to trust her instincts. There were still obstacles. Materials ran out, certain techniques failed, and she occasionally questioned her own ability. But she had learned to treat these challenges as part of the process, not as signs of failure. She reminded herself that every great creator had faced similar struggles, and that perseverance often led to breakthroughs. With this mindset, she approached each problem with curiosity rather than fear, often finding solutions in unexpected ways. One particular breakthrough came when she experimented with combining different textures in a single piece. She had been hesitant, thinking that mixing materials might ruin the cohesion, but when she tried it, the result was astonishing. The textures complemented each other, adding depth and dimension that she had never imagined. The piece seemed to come alive, almost as if it had a heartbeat. She stood back, her eyes wide with wonder, realizing that this experiment had transformed her work. It was no longer just a collection of individual efforts, it was becoming a unified masterpiece. Word began to spread quietly. Friends shared images, neighbors whispered compliments, and a small circle of admirers started to emerge. She was careful not to let it overwhelm her. The attention was encouraging, but it was the work itself that mattered most. Each day she returned to her table, her hands busy, her mind alive with ideas. She had entered a flow that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Time seemed to stretch and contract, hours passing unnoticed as she immersed herself completely in creation. The piece she had been working on for months began to take its final form. She refined details, adjusted colors, and balanced shapes until every element felt intentional. There was a rhythm, a harmony, and a subtle energy that she had been striving for from the beginning. It was as if the work had taken on a life of its own, responding to her guidance while also surprising her with its vitality. She felt a deep connection, a sense that this creation was not just her work, but a reflection of her growth, her persistence, and her vision. One night, she decided to step back and view the piece from a distance. She turned off the lights and let a single lamp illuminate it. The shadows and highlights played across the surfaces, creating an almost magical effect. She could hardly believe what she saw. The piece that had once been a rough sketch, a simple experiment, had evolved into something extraordinary. She felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, joy, and a quiet wonder. This was the moment she had been working toward for months, and it was even more powerful than she had imagined. Despite the excitement, she remained humble. She knew that there was still more to learn, more to explore, and more ways to grow. She continued to experiment with new ideas, testing boundaries and pushing her skills further. But now she carried a quiet confidence. She knew that she had the ability to transform an idea, even one that had seemed ridiculous at first, into something that could inspire and move others. This realization gave her strength and focus, fueling her creativity for the challenges ahead. With her work nearly complete, she began to think about the next steps. How could she share it with the world? How could she ensure that others would see the beauty and effort she had poured into it? She considered exhibitions, online platforms, and small galleries, weighing each option carefully. She knew that the journey of creation was not over, but the journey of sharing was about to begin, and with it, the possibility that the joke that everyone had laughed at could finally be recognized as a masterpiece. As she prepared to present her work more widely, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. The ridicule, the long nights, the moments of doubt. They had all shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for this moment. She understood that creation was never easy, that brilliance often emerges from persistence, and that true mastery is forged through struggle and dedication. The piece in front of her was a testament to that understanding, a tangible reminder that belief in oneself can transform even the most unlikely idea into something remarkable. And so, she looked at her creation, feeling a mixture of anticipation and pride. The piece was no longer just a project or an experiment. It was a statement, a story, and a proof of what determination could achieve. She knew that the next chapter would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new recognition. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment, to feel the satisfaction of hard work realized, and to embrace the quiet triumph of turning what had once been seen as a joke into something extraordinary. After months of hard work and endless experimentation, the day came when she decided to share her work with more people. The idea of showing her creations to a wider audience both thrilled and terrified her. She had spent so long in the quiet of her apartment, immersed in her ideas, that the thought of judgment and scrutiny made her stomach twist. But she also knew that without taking this step, all her effort would remain hidden. She took a deep breath, gathered her most complete pieces, and prepared to show them to the world. She started small, choosing a local community center that allowed artists to display their work. It was modest, intimate, and perfect for someone taking their first steps outside the safety of their apartment. She spent days arranging her pieces, thinking carefully about how each one would be seen, how colors and shapes would flow together, and how to create a space that drew people in. Every detail mattered. The lighting, the angles, even the paths people would take as they moved through the room. She wanted the experience to feel alive, to reflect the energy she had poured into her creations. The morning of the display, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. What if no one appreciated her work? What if they laughed? Just like they had months ago when she first shared a small sketch. She reminded herself of the journey, the late nights, the failures, the moments when she had thought about giving up. She had come too far to be stopped by fear now. With trembling hands, she arranged the last pieces and stepped back to take a look. The room looked alive, each piece shining in its own way, yet coming together as part of a larger story. As the first visitors arrived, she watched from a corner, her heart racing. People moved slowly, pausing to examine details, tilting their heads, leaning in closer. She could hear murmurs of admiration, whispers of surprise. Some smiled, some nodded in appreciation, and a few even took photos. It was more than she had imagined. For the first time, she saw her work through the eyes of others, and it was thrilling. What had once been a private experiment, laughed at by friends and family, was now commanding attention and respect. A woman approached her, clearly fascinated by a piece that had been particularly challenging to complete. "This is incredible," she said. "I can't believe how detailed and thoughtful it is. How did you come up with this?" She smiled, finding it difficult to put into words. "It just grew from ideas I had in my head. I kept working, trying, and learning from mistakes. I guess it became what you see now." The woman nodded, clearly impressed, and moved on to the next piece. Each interaction boosted her confidence, and she began to feel a quiet joy that she had never experienced before. The day continued, and more visitors arrived. She watched as people moved through the space, reacting in ways she had never anticipated. Some were silent, taking in every detail with awe. Others discussed the work with friends, pointing out textures and colors that she had worried might go unnoticed. She realized that her creations were sparking conversation, provoking thought, and eliciting emotions. It was exactly what she had hoped for, and it filled her with a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond personal satisfaction. As the event drew to a close, she felt a wave of relief and pride. She had faced her fears, shared her work, and it had been received with appreciation and admiration. She realized that the laughter she had faced months ago had not defined her or her work. What had once been seen as a joke had transformed into something meaningful, something that could inspire and move people. It was a moment of validation, but also a moment of realization. She was capable of creating something extraordinary. In the days that followed, the impact of the display continued to grow. Visitors shared photos online, Friends told others about the experience, and the small buzz around her work began to expand. She received messages of encouragement, offers of collaboration, and invitations to participate in other exhibitions. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. The recognition she had quietly hoped for was beginning to arrive, and it was a powerful affirmation of her perseverance. With this newfound attention, she began to think about her next steps. She had proven to herself that her vision could be appreciated by others, but she wanted to push further. She started planning larger, more ambitious projects, experimenting with new materials and exploring ideas she had only dreamed about. Her confidence grew, and with it, a sense of responsibility to herself, to her work, and to the people who had taken the time to engage with it. She wanted to continue creating pieces that sparked curiosity, evoked emotion, and left a lasting impression. She also began to connect with other artists, seeking advice and inspiration. These connections provided new perspectives and ideas, allowing her to refine her techniques and expand her creative vision. She learned that collaboration and dialogue could enhance her work, opening doors she had never imagined. Each conversation, each shared experience added depth to her understanding of art and creativity, and she felt herself growing not only as an individual, but as part of a broader creative community. Despite the recognition and growing opportunities, she remained grounded. She never forgot the months of struggle, the nights of frustration, and the moments when she had doubted herself. Those experiences had shaped her, teaching her resilience, patience, and the importance of persistence. She understood that the journey was as important as the destination, and that every challenge she had faced had contributed to the strength and beauty of her work. This awareness kept her humble, focused, and motivated. One evening, she received an invitation to showcase her work at a larger gallery in the city. It was a significant opportunity, one that could elevate her recognition to a wider audience. She felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The stakes were higher, the audience larger, and the expectations greater. But she also felt ready. The journey had prepared her for this moment. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and countless obstacles, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more skilled. She accepted the invitation, knowing that this was the next step in her journey. Preparing for the gallery display required months of careful planning. She selected pieces that best represented her vision, refined details to ensure maximum impact, and thought deeply about the story her work would tell. She wanted visitors to experience not just the beauty of her creations, but also the journey they represented, the struggle, the persistence, and the transformation from a simple idea into a work of art. Every decision was deliberate, every choice intentional, and every detail crafted to convey meaning and emotion. When the gallery day arrived, she felt a mixture of nerves and excitement that was almost overwhelming. People arrived, filling the space with energy, curiosity, and anticipation. She watched as visitors moved through the gallery, their reactions a mixture of awe, admiration, and fascination. Some took photos, some asked questions, and some simply paused, absorbed in the experience. She realized that her work was no longer just hers. It had taken on a life of its own, touching others in ways she had never imagined. By the end of the day, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The gallery display had been a success, her work appreciated by a wide and diverse audience. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the early days when friends and family had laughed at her idea, to the long nights of experimentation and failure, to the small victories that had built her confidence. The transformation was remarkable, not just in her work but in herself. She had grown, evolved, and discovered the true power of persistence, creativity, and self-belief. The recognition continued to grow. She received invitations to participate in exhibitions, collaborate with other artists, and even contribute to creative projects in unexpected fields. Each opportunity brought new challenges, new experiences, and new growth. She embraced them all, understanding that the journey of creation was never truly complete. There would always be more to learn, more to explore, and more ways to express herself. But she was ready, confident in her ability to face whatever came next. Looking back, she realized that the laughter, the doubts, and the ridicule had been essential parts of her journey. They had tested her determination, strengthened her resolve, and ultimately made the triumph even sweeter. The joke that everyone had laughed at had become a masterpiece, a testament to the power of persistence, imagination, and courage. She understood that creativity was not about avoiding failure, but about embracing it, learning from it, and using it as a stepping stone to greatness. As she continued to create, she found joy not only in the final pieces but in the process itself, the experimentation, the problem-solving, and the quiet moments of inspiration. She knew that the journey would never end, that there would always be new ideas to explore, new techniques to master, and new ways to push her creativity further. And she welcomed it, ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. Her story had become more than just a personal journey. It was a story of transformation, resilience, and the power of believing in oneself. What had started as a joke, dismissed by others, had grown into something extraordinary. She had taken an idea, nurtured it through countless failures and experiments, and transformed it into a work of art that inspired and moved others. And in doing so, she had discovered not only her own potential, but the limitless possibilities that come from following one's passion with dedication, courage, and heart. With the success of the gallery display behind her, she felt a mixture of pride and anticipation for what lay ahead. People had seen her work, appreciated it, and some had even been inspired by it. Yet she knew this was just one step in a much larger journey. The journey that began as a private experiment, laughed at by those around her, had now transformed into a tangible masterpiece, and she was determined to keep pushing forward. She began receiving messages from people she had never met, artists, enthusiasts, and even strangers from other cities who had come across images of her work online. They shared how her creations had inspired them, sparked ideas of their own, and encouraged them to pursue something they had been hesitant about. Each message reminded her that her work had grown beyond the walls of her apartment and the confines of her city. It was touching lives, and that realization gave her a sense of purpose deeper than any praise she had ever received. Despite the recognition, she remained deeply connected to her creative process. She never wanted to lose the sense of wonder and curiosity that had driven her from the beginning. She continued experimenting, combining materials, colors, and techniques in ways she had never tried before. Each new piece was an exploration, a challenge, and a conversation between her imagination and reality. The journey of creation had become as important as the final product, and she relished every moment of it. One morning, she received an invitation from a prestigious art festival in another city. The festival celebrated innovation and creativity, bringing together artists from around the world. She felt nervous, but the excitement was stronger than the fear. Traveling to a new city, displaying her work among seasoned artists, and engaging with an international audience was daunting. Yet she knew she was ready. The months and years of struggle had prepared her for this moment, and she felt confident in her ability to share her vision with a broader audience. Preparing for the festival required intense focus. She carefully selected pieces that represented her journey, her style, and her growth. She worked late into the night, refining details, perfecting arrangements, and imagining how viewers would experience the work. Each piece told a story, the story of a simple idea, dismissed as a joke, growing through determination and persistence into a creation that could touch people. She wanted every visitor to feel that story, to understand the path that had led her here. Arriving at the festival, she felt a rush of energy and anticipation. The venue was alive with creativity, conversations, and excitement. She set up her display with care, ensuring that every piece was positioned to highlight its strengths. As the festival began, people started moving through the space, pausing, observing, and reacting. She watched their expressions, curiosity, admiration, and sometimes awe. The work that had once been laughed at was now drawing genuine appreciation and respect from a diverse audience. Throughout the day, she met artists from different backgrounds and disciplines. They shared their experiences, challenges, and ideas, and she realized that her journey, though unique, resonated with many of them. They spoke of moments of doubt, ridicule, and struggle, and how persistence had led them to create something meaningful. These conversations strengthened her sense of community and purpose. She understood that her story was not just about individual achievement, but about the universal power of perseverance, creativity, and belief in oneself. The highlight of the festival came when a well-known critic approached her display. The critic examined her pieces with careful attention, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. After a long pause, they looked at her and said, Your work is extraordinary. It carries emotion, depth, and a story that is immediately engaging. It is clear that each piece has been created with intention and heart. The words resonated deeply. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and countless obstacles, but now her work was being recognized by someone with the experience and authority to understand its value. It was a validation not just of her talent, but of her dedication and resilience. As the festival continued, she realized that her creations had sparked conversations among visitors. People discussed textures, colors, and forms, often referencing the emotion they felt when observing her work. Some asked how she had learned to combine materials in such inventive ways, and she shared her journey openly, the mistakes, the experiments, and the lessons learned along the way. Her transparency and honesty inspired others, showing that even ideas once dismissed as jokes could evolve into something remarkable when nurtured with patience and courage. Returning home from the festival, she felt a sense of accomplishment unlike any she had experienced before. She reflected on the journey that had begun with sketches in a notebook, laughed at by friends and family, and grown into a body of work admired by people far and wide. The transformation was remarkable, not only in her creations but in herself. She had grown more confident, resilient, and aware of her own potential. She understood that the true measure of success was not recognition alone, but the journey of growth, learning, and persistence that led to it. With this newfound recognition, she began mentoring others who had creative ideas but lacked the confidence to pursue them. She shared her experiences, offering guidance, encouragement, and inspiration. She emphasized the importance of persistence, patience, and self-belief, reminding them that every journey begins with a single step, often taken in solitude, often met with skepticism. Her story became a beacon for others, demonstrating that ideas, no matter how improbable they seem, could flourish into something extraordinary with dedication and courage. Over time, her work continued to evolve. She explored new mediums, combined unexpected materials, and experimented with forms that challenged conventional boundaries. Each new creation was a step forward, a new opportunity to express her vision and push the limits of her imagination. She embraced the journey with the same passion and curiosity that had driven her from the very beginning, understanding that creativity was a lifelong pursuit, and that every experiment, success, and failure contributed to growth. She also began to collaborate with other artists on projects that combined different styles and disciplines. These collaborations opened doors to new perspectives, techniques, and creative approaches. She learned to appreciate the value of dialogue, teamwork, and shared vision, realizing that art was not only about individual expression, but also about connection, communication, and collaboration. Each project enriched her experience, expanded her skills, and deepened her understanding of creativity. Despite her growing success, she remained humble and grounded. She never forgot the ridicule she had faced or the moments of doubt and frustration. Those experiences had shaped her, strengthened her resolve, and fueled her determination. She understood that creativity required courage, the courage to pursue an idea that others might dismiss, to experiment, to fail, and to keep going. Her journey had taught her that persistence and passion were as important as talent, and that true mastery was achieved through dedication and resilience. Years later, she looked back at the path she had traveled. The joke that everyone had once laughed at had become a masterpiece admired by many. She realized that the journey had been as important as the destination, shaping not only her work but her character. The long nights, the failures, the moments of doubt, and the small victories had all contributed to her growth. She had discovered her own potential, the power of persistence, and the joy of creating something that could inspire others. Her story became a source of inspiration for countless people. Through exhibitions, talks, and mentorship, she shared the lessons she had learned. She emphasized the importance of believing in oneself, embracing failure as a teacher, and nurturing ideas with patience and dedication. People were inspired not just by her work, but by her journey. The transformation from an idea dismissed as a joke to a creation celebrated for its brilliance and originality. In the end, she understood that success was not simply about recognition or accolades. It was about the courage to pursue a vision, the dedication to nurture it through challenges, and the willingness to grow along the way. The masterpiece she had created was a reflection of that journey, a testament to the resilience, creativity, and heart that had carried her from a quiet dream to a celebrated reality. She knew that the journey would continue, with new ideas, challenges, and creations, but she welcomed it, ready to embrace the possibilities and the joy of creation. The legacy she left was not just in her work, but in the message it carried, that even ideas laughed at, dismissed, or considered impossible could grow into something extraordinary when nurtured with belief, persistence, and courage. The journey from a joke to a masterpiece was not just a story of art, but a story of human resilience, creativity, and the enduring power of hope.